Hello, everybody. That was amazing. Michael Fitzpatrick, how about that? This is the spot where music and this kind of conversation were really, this place was conceived for this day like today. There are people in the back, so I just want to mention if you've got room next to you, maybe you could raise your hand if you've got a chair empty next to you. So those people who were standing, if you want to find a chair, there's seats scattered around here, seats over here. So if you want to sit, you're welcome to. Michael's piece is so cool because, of course, music connects all of us, takes us to a common place, opens our hearts, brings us to this place of openness, and that's the right way to approach this event. Conversation about climate change, about where we are, the intersection of arts, community, activism, politics, what to do, what to trust, all that stuff is among the things we are going to talk about today. We have a great panel, very exciting, and accomplished people, well-informed, and we're going to have a lively discussion. It's going to be divided up into a few chunks. The first one is, once we get past introductions, just really talking about each person's area of expertise and their sort of entrance into this conversation. The second piece is really going to be more about talking about the obstacles, because I think we all share a sense that there are things that we could and should be doing. But to just have a little bit of a spicy conversation about the obstacles. And the third piece is about what can we do? Are there actions, solutions, opportunities for us to make things change and sort of stem the tide of what's been happening over the last 100 years or so? So following that, we've got a whole thing planned for you today. You didn't even know. Following that, just like preschool, there would be a snack. And then some little breakout groups. And the subject and the details of those breakout groups we can discuss a little later on. But the idea and the hope is that once we have this spicy conversation and we get to sort of get inspired and educated and fired up a little bit, that we don't just leave it there, that we take it into our community, into our little groups, see what happens, and keep going. Because these are not just one-shot event and then you're done. This is about the ongoing effort. So welcome. Pretty exciting. Thanks to Biff for putting this on again, the Global Town Hall. We also are going to have some guests who are not physically with us on stage, but are going to be joining us via modern world of technology, Google Hangout, someone from Hawaii, someone in the UK, someone in Seattle, so we're going to have a nice little rounded conversation. But anyway, everybody okay? You're situated? You just prefer to stand? It's okay. I understand. But there are places still. I can see them.
It's my big panel.
Mark's get set. We'll just go. Why don't we start with introductions, and Shaun McGrath, you want to go first?
Sure. I'm Shaun McGrath. I'm the regional administrator for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Prior to that, I served as mayor of Boulder here, and was on the E-Town board at one point, and was also a founding board member for BIF. So this event here today is really an intersection of all kinds of things I really care about passionately.
My name is Leilani Munter, and I'm a biology graduate turned race car driver and environmental activist. And I use my voice within the racing world to sort of raise awareness around environmental issues that we're facing, and clean energy and electric cars and plant-based diet. And I also have the honor of driving the very beautiful James Bond-like Tesla Model S in Louie Psihoyos' new film, Racing Extinction.
Yeah, my name is Louie Psihoyos. I'm director of the executive director of the Oceanic Preservation Society. We did 2 films, The Cove and the closing night Extinction. That's going to be on Sunday night. We do films to try to save the oceans. The joke in my business was that we're not trying to save the whole planet, just 70% of it. With the new film, we're adding the extra 30%.
I think most of you know, but those online, I just say my name is Nick Forster. I'm a bluegrass musician who also is the founder and host of E-Town and responsible for this spot. More later. Here's this.
Hi, my name is Joyce, and I am a documentary filmmaker. I have films, and I'm here today to talk a little bit about my experience in creating the documentary Arise, and my past experience with documentaries in the 80s was mostly peace and justice issues. And I shifted my focus to environmental issues and children's issues and women's issues in the 90s. So I'm really honored and grateful to be here today to talk about how women are taking incredible leadership roles around the world and around the globe in their villages, their cities, their towns, and making change in regards to the environmental issues that they're facing.
My name is Candice Orlando. I'm Laurie Joyce's daughter, and we co-directed Arise together, so it's a mother-daughter film. I'm also the executive director of a urban farm in Denver called Herbiculture Community Farms, and we're doing a lot of work around food access and food justice in Denver.
And I'm Waleed Abdalati. I'm director of the Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences at CU Boulder. I'm also a professor in the Department of Geography. My institute really focuses on environmental research of all sorts, understanding the Earth system, how it's changing, why it's changing, and the implications of that. My own research is in primarily Arctic ice cover. Glaciers and ice sheets, a little bit of sea ice, and I spent a lot of time at NASA, most recently as the agency chief scientist, and what I tell my kids is I watch ice melt from space.
Hunter Lovins, I am president of Natural Capitalism Solutions. We work with companies, communities, countries on ways to implement more regenerative practices profitably. I teach. I'm a professor of sustainable business at the Bard MBA, and I roam the planet, most recently in China, helping the Chinese build a natural capital accounting protocol to count the value of intact nature in the economic equation, and to work with the Chinese on finding ways to implement their commitment to create the ecological civilization. For those of you who are afraid that China is now the world's largest emitter of CO2, it's also the world's largest economy. It also is the world's largest country really serious about getting off of coal, they can't breathe, and getting on to renewable energy. So I'm spending a lot of time in China. I also am on the steering committee of the Club of Rome. We've been asked by, among others, the King of Bhutan to reinvent the global economy, a modest task. And so perhaps in a bit I'll talk a little about, yeah. In fact, I cannot be in a breakout group because I got to go climb on another airplane, go out to LA and give yet another speech. But we can talk a bit about how one might go about inventing an economy in service to life. As Bucky put it, an economy that works for 100% of humanity.
Yeah. Let's also welcome via the Google Hangout Jeff Orlowski. You're in Hawaii, right?
I am in Hawaii right now. We are finishing up a shoot. I fly home to Boulder tonight, I believe, with a layover in LA. Directed Chasing Ice, and we are working on a follow-up film right now.
And what's the nature of the follow-up film?
Yet to be announced publicly, but I'll probably drop some hints over the course of this conversation.
And Eve Andrews?
Hi. I am the culture editor for Grist. We're an environmental online news organization, and I write about mostly kind of the intersection of environmental issues and climate change with a whole range of things that have to do with pop culture and women's issues.
Yeah, wow. And George Marshall, are you there too?
Yes, hello, how do you do? From
Hi, George.
sunny Mid Wales, Llanidloes in Mid Wales, hello.
And you've got your co-pilot with you?
I have, he's come along for the ride. And I am the founder of a climate change communications non-profit, the Climate Outreach and Information Network. And I'm also the author of a book, Don't Even Think About It, Why Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change. So an issue, but I think we might come on to later, which is what is it about climate change which makes it so hard for us to come to terms with it? And I guess also the interesting question, which is whether documentary and film is a way that helps us to overcome those obstacles and you know, find meaning and really make that emotional connection with the science.
Yeah. And George, maybe we can start with you. Just wondering about you obviously had an academic life, and as an author you chose this subject and you chose this particular area of focus and passion. Was there either an event or something that you learned that helped facilitate that change, that transition in your life?
You know, it's very interesting. We talk about climate change as if we just somehow absorb climate change through our fingertips, like we read a report. We don't recognize that there's actually a process by which we reach those beliefs. And it's quite interesting when you speak with people who are from a religious background, but they understand the meaning of epiphany, the idea that there might be particular moments when maybe you see a documentary, or for me, I think that the key moments was we started having some very, very strange weather here in Britain around the late 90s, early 2000s. And I think in the end, I remember very clearly sitting outside in an evening in November, and it was as warm as summer, thinking, okay, there's something weird going on here. And for me, it was almost like a religious experience.
Yeah.
It was like something that felt bigger and greater than myself, and I just suddenly switched on. But I think it's a key question what you're asking there, is really understanding, are there moments which switch people on, and can we create those moments through our art? Can we find a way of saying, of taking people to a place where they make that real step over into a stage of commitment and conviction? Yeah?
Mm-hmm. And just out of curiosity, were you a parent at the time? Were you a dad when that happened?
No, yeah. It was before I was a father. But you know, there's no direct connection between children concerned about climate change. Actually, in surveys, people with children are, if anything, slightly less concerned about climate change than people without. What happens is you become persuaded of climate change, and then you become deeply concerned about your children, rather than it being the other way around.
And Waleed, let me just ask you about that transition. Was there an academic sort of pursuit that led you into this area of focus?
I wouldn't say there was an epiphany or a moment of transition. It was an evolution that many steps along the way was continually reinforced. You know, as a kid growing up in, you know, a beautiful area with elm trees and green grass and, you know, once in a while sunshine. It was upstate New York. I just had an appreciation at a very young age for the beauty of nature, and I don't know what it is about me, but I always had a sense of a frailty there, that it needed to be cared for. And then as I became more educated, first as an engineer, but when I went to graduate school, I got more interested in what satellites were seeing rather than the actual design and development of them, which is what I did as an engineer. I looked at the Earth really from space in a very different way, and in much the same way this Earthrise picture, you know, shows a very frail, delicate, beautiful Earth suspended in the darkness. I saw a vibrant Earth, a dynamic Earth, but also a frail Earth. You know, that atmosphere is so thin by comparison. And, you know, add to that, I happen to study glaciers and ice sheets, and as I watched them melt, there were animations that I found kind of scary. Just they got smaller and smaller, and you find yourself saying, "No, stop, don't." Right. And so it wasn't a moment. It was a continually reinforced evolution
Yeah.
and progression.
And Jeff Orlowski, I don't know how long we're going to have you online. I know you've got some other things going on this afternoon. Hearing Waleed talk about shrinking glaciers, talk a little bit about, because this is the film festival after all, and we're interested in creating community around this conversation. And certainly Chasing Ice is one of the standout films that raised the issue and educated people about that very palpable demonstration of what's changing. Talk a little bit about how the film, in your view, has made a difference.
Well, Waleed, we met a while back, and I think one of the interesting things that James Balog, the subject of Chasing Ice, figured out was how to take this issue that the scientists were seeing in many ways from satellites, seeing this retreat over time from satellite imagery, and James wanted to make it much more tangible to, as a photographer, make it tangible to audiences through ground-based photography. That was one of the big things that James figured out early on, and why he wanted to approach his project in that way. We were just fortunate enough to be able to follow his story and the creation of the Extreme Ice Survey over the course of those few years. I think being able to take, one of the themes I think of this issue is the kind of chasm between the scientific community and the general public. And there's this concept of the curse of knowledge. And in many cases, scientists have so much information about a subject that it becomes more and more difficult to communicate it with the average person who doesn't know much about the issue. So I think really, to go to your question, what we were trying to do with Chasing Ice and our subsequent work is, how do you package this very complicated science in a way that the average layperson can get it quickly and understand it quickly in a matter of 75 minutes or an hour and a half? Yeah. I think we were all kind of surprised and blown away by the outreach that Chasing Ice was able to accomplish. And really, from our perspective, all the tens of millions of people that got to see the film, that's really just showcasing the story of how glaciers are changing, what's going on, and trying to make it tangible to the public. Yeah,
it's interesting to think about the audiences that came to see your film, and whether or not they were predisposed to sort of share the sense of this as being an urgent problem or not. You have no way of knowing who's coming. I'm thinking about Leilani's world as being something where you think about NASCAR, and NASCAR, we would be willing to bet, is an area where most people really are not thinking about this issue. That's a community that is carbon footprint, come on, it's NASCAR.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly why I feel they're some of the most important people to talk to, right? We cannot go around and preach to the choir and expect to really create a global movement. We have to get out and talk to the people that don't agree with us yet. If we only work with people who already believe in the same things that we do, then who's going to change the minds of those who don't? And I found that when I had my epiphany moment was seeing an inconvenient truth.
Oh, wow.
And so I had always, my degree is in biology, and I'd always been very worried about the planet and our environment, but I really just had addressed it in my personal life and to my friends and to my family. But seeing that film really made it urgent for me, and it made me realize that I needed to use my voice as a driver to talk about these things. So I'm really, now those two worlds of mine are endlessly intertwined, because without the race car, I don't have the ability to reach millions of people. It's what gives me my voice to talk to a large demographic of people that are surprisingly open to this. In fact, I take my Tesla Model S to all of my races now. And I have so many race fans at the racetrack. They want to see my Tesla. They want to talk about electric cars. They want to ask me questions about the solar panels on my roof and my vegan diet. And so they are really open and interested in this. We have to start having the conversation.
Yeah. What about the other drivers? Are they, do they say, oh God, here she comes, that vegan electric girl?
I think they do say that, yes. To be honest, yes. But there are 2 other vegan drivers. There's 3 of us now.
You have a special commissary somewhere where you can go and
Yeah, we call ourselves the Vegan Racing Mafia.
Yeah. And Shaun McGrath, just the EPA is such an interesting participant in this conversation, because ultimately we need science. We need that intersection of arts and outreach. We need to build community and build audience, but at the same time, we need regulation. We need guidance. Government has a really valuable role to play. And talk a little bit about how, in your new role as Director of Region 8, you see the EPA sort of taking on this conversation.
Well, that's right, absolutely. The intersection of science and regulation is really the basis of what we're doing at Environmental Protection Agency. And in 2009, a key thing happened, and that was the administrator for EPA signed what was called an endangerment finding. And what it did was we looked at all the science that was out there, the best science we could get, and the administrator determined that greenhouse gases were an endangerment to public health and welfare. And that gave us the ability and the legal framework to then go out and regulate greenhouse gases. The first place that we looked at was regulating greenhouse gases from cars, from automobiles. And now that is moving out into power plants, to our electric sector, and there's a huge initiative underway that I might talk a little bit more about if we have time, but that will allow us to rein in greenhouse gas emissions from carbon from our power sector.
But what about the EPA being this sort of, so one of the obstacles that we're going to touch on later on is this public perception of climate change as being a divisive issue, and that the EPA is somehow anti-business and an economic drag on our U.S. economy. Just briefly, because I know it's a big deal, just talk about whether you actually see any of that in your day-to-day life.
Oh gosh, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of voices out there that don't believe in climate change, don't want regulation. They attack the EPA. I guess what I'd say to it is, number one, I'm not getting hung up on that. I have clear direction from the president and the administrator, Gina McCarthy. She speaks to this issue all the time, and that is there's this misperception that we pursue climate change, carbon reductions, at the expense of the economy. But the reality is they go hand in hand. And if you look at what we've done under the Clean Air Act, we heard the same arguments then, but over the last 4 decades, we've been able to reduce our air pollution 70%. At the same time, our economy tripled. So that's the argument back.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that public perception story. And Eve, I don't know if you're still there. Mm-hmm. You're engaged in journalism. You're engaged with an online community, and this is a sweet spot for you. Talk a little bit about how you see this story unfolding in media right now.
Honestly, something that I've been thinking a lot about recently is kind of, especially in the age of internet journalism and in the age of Twitter, is striking a balance between not having enough information and having too much information. Because you're just bombarded with so many things every day that it's hard to know what to take seriously and what to actually take to heart. Mm-hmm. And I think that is kind of where film can play a valuable role, because especially I write about this stuff all the time. I write about it every day, and I went to the premiere of Louie's film Racing Extinction, and even that really made me tear up a little bit. So I think that if you have kind of focused, full-length, beautifully made forms of media, that can be a super effective way to get people to care about these things.
Yeah. And Louie, just talking about film and art in general in terms of a convener, bringing people together around this issue and this conversation. As you're making the film, do you find that the film sort of reveals itself while you're making it, or do you start knowing what that story is going to be that you're going to tell, and what you hope the effect of that film is going to be?
Oh, we had a direction where we wanted to go, but we had a German executive producer who was putting most of the money in for this film. He wanted to see exactly where we were going. It's like, I told him, like Jacques Cousteau said, if to an investor who asked what's he going to find when he gets there, he said, if I knew, I wouldn't go there.
Right.
I feel it's the same thing with us. We wanted to make a film that was about mass extinction of species, but at the end we wanted to have people rise up out of their chairs. So the idea is not to bring people down with the information. Is how do you tell a exciting story out of it so that when people get out of the theater, they feel like they're empowered, that they want to do something, they become an ally. That was the. Yeah. But we didn't start out. We made a lot of it came together in the editing room.
Yeah.
So.
And let's just talk a little bit about, because Al Gore's film Inconvenient Truth was a wake-up call for a lot of people, and yet a lot of people in the audience felt that they left there just kind of hanging, not really, didn't know what to do, didn't know where to go, didn't know how to continue the conversation. It was just like, wow, that's scary and weird, and what am I going to do now?
Well, that film cost me $28,000. The next day I went out and bought a Prius. But then that was like at the beginning. That was the ante. I think, then I started getting electric cars, and now we've got the company has a Tesla, and we have I've been driving a 12-year-old Toyota RAV electric car, and it was powered by solar panels. We have. I just sold my house a couple of weeks ago here, but we had 140% of our energy off the roof. That was ops and my home. So that means I get checks from the electric company in December, the darkest month of the year. Yeah. The license plate on I think I talked about this before on E-Town. My license plate says VUS. It stands for Vehicle Using Sun. It's the opposite of an SUV.
Yeah. He's bragging. Yeah.
It's inspiring.
Yeah, okay. Inspiring. He's bragging. Lori, Joyce, and Candice. So you guys, mother-daughter. There's a part of this conversation that I think is it's underreported, and it really has to do with how women are in the world, and a woman's perspective in terms of being engaged with providing for a family. I mean, I can't speak to that, but this is what your film is really touching on. I wonder if you could just talk a little about that.
Well, yes. I mean, I really have, a couple of people have touched upon how, and you in particular touched upon how, we walked out of the theater at Inconvenient Truth going, well, let's see, I think I'll just go pull the covers over my head because, where's the hope in this? And so when we decided to make this film about women and how they were reaching out and taking care of the planet all over the world, we wanted to show a very hopeful message. We wanted people to be inspired. We wanted people to see that there are solutions. And so, when we went into the village in Kenya to document Wangari Maathai's Greenbelt movement, and we were met by these incredible women who were singing and dancing and happy and planting trees and replenishing the earth. And I think that that's something that a woman really does have a direct connection to, is our Mother Earth. And we're the nurturers, we're the caregivers for the most part. I mean, men are very good at that as well, but if you look at women, that we have that connection. And that's what we wanted to do, was show that you can replenish where people have come in and been destructive and just left. Where oil companies have come in Ecuador, and the things that they leave behind it's unspeakable. And these women are replenishing the earth by planting trees or planting gardens, and so we really wanted to create that hopeful message. And we get that. People end up leaving the theater with tears in their eyes, and it does create a ripple effect. And I can talk a little bit about that later. I wanted to let Candice chime in on that.
Yeah, I mean, just we speak a lot together, so she said a lot of the things that I was thinking of. We have the same kind of mind connection. But I do want to bring up that I feel like there's a lot of community centered around these issues. Like, I feel like communities come together and they're able to create change, and that's a lot of what I saw when we were traveling the world and, you know, interviewing these amazing women. And, you know, just a quick story, I became an urban farmer through this trip in Ecuador, and seeing people growing food for their families and their communities, and that love for it. And so it changed my life, and now I know many people that have seen many environmental films, including Arise, that are making changes because they see so these films. It does create change. It's a really powerful medium.
You know, we started in 1991 with E-Town, and Hunter, you were on I believe you were on our first season, and as were scientists from NCAR, and we had a wide variety of people talking about climate change, and the rough concept, which is not dissimilar from the filmmakers, is just use music and art to try to pull an audience together and then stimulate the conversation and create dialogue. But it was, I don't think we were particularly good at it in the early days, but you know, it was kind of abrupt. Like, okay, that was a great song. Now we're going to talk about how we're all screwed. Now let's go back to music. You know, it's just this kind of crazy conundrum. And you, Hunter, were, you know, you were already very media savvy back then, but this is something you've been at for a while. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you use media to be inclusive and then make sure you take people somewhere.
None of us were any damn good back then. My first book on climate change was 1981 on solutions. Least cost energy, solving the CO2 problem. Back then it was a problem, not a crisis. And 30 years later, my book, The Way Out, Kickstarting Capitalism to Save Our Economic Ass, is a little more edgy about it. But the point is the same. There is a business case for solving this. Assume climate change is a hoax. Don't go to Vegas on the odds of that being true. But if all you are is a profit-maximizing capitalist, you would do exactly what you'd do if you were scared to death of climate change, because we know how to solve this one at a profit. It's what the smart companies are doing. It's why companies like Unilever, IKEA, Apple, Google, hundreds of others are pledging to go 100% renewably powered. They can do the math. They see the utility bills going up. Why do I drive a Leaf? I debated the frackers, and the guy from the fracking industry had the last line. He was good. He said, you want our product, we're going to drill it, you're going to buy it. What do you say? So the next morning, the guy I live with said, hey, you want to go test drive a Leaf? Yeah. So my Leaf is 100% powered by the solar on the ranch. Of course, first what we did was a lot of efficiency. And if you just run the numbers, I mean, Shaun, you guys should be out in front of this. Business, if you're not doing this stuff, you're just stupid. If you guys, how many of you have solar on your roofs? The rest of you, you're just stupid. Boulder, how come we're not a muni? Munis have lower rates. Let's go. Stop arguing about the politics of it. Let's just argue the economics. And on the economic case, this stuff wins. If we just did what was in our own private internal best interest, we'd solve this problem at a profit.
I think there is a question of two things, though, I want to mention. One is scale, and the other is choice. People who are struggling economically, people who are unable to have the kind of flexibility that we have here in this town. I mean, I look at myself as being a sort of eco-yuppie poster child kind of person, because I'm lucky enough to live a mile away from where I work, so I can walk or ride my bike most of the year. This building makes 56 kilowatts up on the roof. We didn't even run natural gas into the building because we knew we didn't need it. So LED lights and all this stuff, and solar thermal. I am. He's right.
That's the point. People like us ought to be bragging, ought to be proud, ought to be out there.
But I'm just saying, until we can amplify and build a community and leverage those activities, my activity doesn't make a difference. It's not going to make a dent. What I do is not going to make a difference.
That's simply not true. People look to you, and Leilani, what earthly difference do you make driving a car around an oval? People look at you.
And I get to beat the boys at their own game.
What earthly difference does it make to make a film? People look at it.
Yeah. And George, maybe you could chime in here about the subject of your book, why it is that we have a hard time processing this. Are you doing okay? Are you enjoying the thing so far?
Yeah, it's really fun.
Oh, good. So maybe just tell us a little bit about why it is that our brains are hardwired not to receive this message.
I think the key point is that our brains are wired to ignore lots of things. You know, we'd go crazy if we paid attention to everything. So it's the skill with which we disattend. We've got a skill to pay attention to things and a skill to not pay attention to it. And really the issue of climate change is that it's both not very strong on the things we like to pay attention to, and it's kind of good at the things we like to not pay attention to. So, I mean, the obvious things, of course, is that it's intangible and it's a kind of wobbly issue. It doesn't fit very well with the things that we like to respond to. It's not here and now, but you know, we do our very best to make sure it's not here and now by saying, well, it's somewhere else, it's in the future. So there's a two-way process going on here. It's neither something which immediately comes and hits us between the eyes, but it's also something we try and make sure is as far away as possible. I think when you open the newspapers, you get a very clear idea of that there's some issues which really speak to us. We open up the newspapers now and we see a lot of stuff about Islamic State. You know, beheading enemies with intention to cause harm, beheading people on YouTube is pretty high up the ranks of things which demand our attention, right? The things that we're liable to not pay attention to are the things that we're not hearing about from our friends and the people around us. You know, the most important signals we get are actually not going to be from the newspapers. It's going to be from what we're receiving, the social signals we're getting from the people we know. And I think this is also an important thing with climate change, is a lot of people, the vast majority of people, really don't talk about or think about climate change from one year to the next. They don't talk about it with their friends, so their friends don't get the message that this is something that they should pay attention to. Then, of course, when politicians go and they ask people, what are the issues that you care about? Well, they're not hearing it either, because people haven't got it in the front of their minds to talk about. And then they go away, and then they don't do anything with it, and then they don't say anything about it, and then the newspapers don't report it. So whilst we've got this very fractious debate between the people who passionately believe in it and the people who deny it, there's an enormous wide open space in between of the people who, quite frankly, don't think or talk about it from one year to the next. And that's really what worries me, that socially constructed silence. Because that's one of the key reasons why we're ignoring it, is because if we're not receiving those social signals to say, hey, pay attention to this is something you need to know about, we'll just disregard it, right? Because let's face it, we've got a load of other stuff shouting at us saying, me, buy me, pay attention to me, this is important.
And so to that, you know, Hunter's argument about, yeah, buy me, do this stuff, she's just saying, well, you're an idiot if you don't do it, regardless of whether you believe it or not.
Yeah, well, what I like about what Hunter is doing is that she's actually trying to speak to people's values, where they come from. And I think this is the other reason that a lot of people ignore climate change, is that the way we're talking about it, the way we have talked about it for 20 years, does not speak well to the values of many, many people. It speaks well to people like me. I get it, I love it, and I think this is true of a lot of films too. I look at them and they move me deeply. But for the majority of people out there, especially people with conservative values, we have not managed to find a way of talking about climate change yet which adequately engages with them and where they come from. I think that's a big challenge.
Is that a role that you think the faith community could have something to do with?
I think we need to recognize that a third of Americans are evangelicals. There's a lot of potential there for reaching people, both through their churches and through faith. But I also think that there's a lot that we can learn from that. The most effective social organizing is done by faith groups. One of the most effective films, or one of the most successful films, was Passion of Christ. I don't think it's a particularly good film, but hugely successful, right up there, 25th ever, highest ever grossing in the box office. And the reason for that was because it was shown through churches, so people brought people in to see it. So I guess one of the ideas I'd like to plant in this conversation is it's not just about the film, it's about how people consume it. Mm-hmm. And when people get together with their friends and their families, or they get invited to participate in something, they absorb it in a way that actually changes who they are and what they think about themselves, rather than just passively absorbing it. So there's a lot we can learn from the evangelical community about how to use the media in a way to bring people in and create a community of shared belief, shall we say.
Yeah.
Nick, I'd like to share a story if I can. So everything that George just brought up there, we were studying that quite a bit when we released Chasing Ice. And we came up with an idea for an experiment that we found to be very effective, where, as you're saying, a lot of times films preach to the choir and they kind of talk to the pre-converted. We did an experiment where we wanted to take Chasing Ice to one congressional district where we knew the congressman was publicly a denier of climate change. And we went to Central Ohio and we spent 3 months on tour saturating this one congressional district with screenings of Chasing Ice, working with a lot of religious communities. Interfaith Power and Light, the Evangelical Environmental Network, the Catholic Climate Covenant. So we were working with all different religious communities, with Catholic high schools and colleges, Boy Scouts, going for atypical messengers. We weren't going for the Greenpeaces and the Sierra Clubs. And we screened for we interacted with about 10,000 people in the district. And we did a very simple campaign where we made a Chasing Ice poster, and on the back of the poster, it said, "Dear Congressman Teabury," with an empty blank space for people to write their message. And after every screening, we just asked people to share their voice with their congressman, who currently was not embracing the science of climate change. And we posted it to Facebook and Twitter, and we shared it with his constituents and with the public. And this congressman acknowledged, in about a month and a half, he acknowledged the reality of climate change because the message was coming from his district through their values. I was blown away by the messages that the constituents were writing, things that I would never say personally. But when you talk to a farmer about why climate change is affecting them, their message comes from the heart, and they were speaking to their congressman in a way that was empathetic to the congressman. So we were able to find that shift, and I think it's George, is a great example of what you're referencing in terms of how do you talk with people about things that matter to them.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Louie, you've introduced a whole nother thing for us to be scared about, which is mass extinction. So just talk a little bit about how you think that might broaden the conversation and become ultimately more inclusive if you're approaching the same issue from a different direction.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to, it's not just about the science for us, it's about getting people to care emotionally. I mean, I think the way you get people to change behavior is by changing their heart, not their mind. That's what the science is showing about that. So a lot of people care about animals. You know, we're not the only species on this planet. I don't even think we're the smartest. You know, we don't even know how many species there are on the planet, but we know that we're losing them faster than our ability for scientists to record that they're here on the planet with us. There's been 5 major extinctions in the history of the planet. We're going through a 6th one right now, and it's going to happen on our watch. So this is just, you know, this to me is a way to mobilize the children of the conservatives, the wives of the conservatives that do care about these issues of, you know, these other animals, these other species that we share the planet with, and that's the way we're going to do an end around, you know, the conservatives by getting at their wives and their children. Oh, seriously, I mean, we're going to be out in 220 countries on the same day, probably in December, and you know, we'll probably have as many people as Inconvenient Truth on a single night. And we want to do this right around COP21 so that we're getting, you know, we build this level of constituents that you can't get when you're just, you know, just talking to your neighbor. I mean, films are such a powerful weapon.
You've got something you want to say.
I do. You know, we're talking about conservatism, and we did Screen to Rise in, it's partially my native state of Idaho. And if anybody knows about Idaho, it's very conservative. There's only 2 pockets of Idaho that are pretty liberal. But my brother is a Christian conservative, and he was in the audience, and he had tears in his eyes after he saw Arise. There's a very spiritual element to Arise, and you know, part of our distribution plan as well is getting the film into the churches, and right now we're being distributed through Gaiam and Beyond Words, which is putting us into the more metaphysical New Age people. I mean, I know that a lot of that is preaching to the choir as well, but I just wanted to speak to the fact that films can be used in churches, and if you do speak to people's spirit, it really does change hearts and minds.
Yeah. Waleed, was Chasing Ice a perfect opportunity for you as a scientist to get your message out to a bigger audience?
Yeah, I think in a different way. I remember meeting with James Baylog as Extreme Ice Survey was just getting started, and talking with him about sort of candidate places to go to. And when you see something from space, and you see the imagery, and you do the analysis, and you quantify the loss in area, and so forth, those are numbers. Those are things that a scientist can his or her teeth into, that you know, tell me as a scientist a story. What James and the others did, particularly in the movie, was bring it to people in a way that connects with people, gets to the hearts. When you see it up close like that, you know, the first time I went to Greenland, I was absolutely blown away, and I thought, I wish everyone I cared about could see this. And then I found myself thinking, I wish people I didn't care about could see this, because that might make a difference too. And that's what the movie did. It brought some of that beauty and some of that rapidly, you know, the Arctic is the most rapidly changing place on Earth, and on large scales, and it brought that beauty, that phenomenon, literally and figuratively, in very, very clear focus. And I think it did what I, as a scientist, what the data don't do, and that's tell the story, draw you in, get you to want a certain outcome. So it was very, I don't say gratifying. It was just wonderful to see all the science I had been looking at through a very different lens, reaching to the different parts of the mind and the heart than the kinds of things I've seen. Because it is far away. I mean, you're talking about, you know, the changing Arctic is far away. So sometimes bringing that into the closer context of a community in a theater, and still that people don't necessarily make that connection. It's far away unless you look at the Earth from the moon or from Saturn. Right. It's awfully close when you do that. We've got, hey, is that you, Eve? Hey.
Yeah.
Good. You just popped up on our screen, and I just assumed you're ready to rock in some way.
I didn't do anything to pop up on that. But that is okay. So actually, just this morning, I was watching Vice's premiere episode of their Vice on HBO series, and the way that they make the connection between the Arctic and humans who live away from the Arctic, which is the vast majority of humans, is to show how sea level rise is already affecting communities in Bangladesh. And I think the most effective way to talk about climate change is to not talk about glaciers, but talk about, like, hey, this is actually changing human lives right now, and this is how, and this is what that looks like, and this is how this is going to affect you eventually, even if you're not in a coastal village in a developing country. So I think that the more focus that is put on that message, the better, frankly.
Yeah, it's more universal.
Yeah.
You know, we've got about 20 minutes left before we do the breakout groups.
And I don't know how you guys are doing, but I'm sure enjoying this conversation. This is a great panel. Thanks for everybody's attention and focus. I wonder if we might take this last 20 minutes and maybe just starting with Shaun, because again, we have consensus, we have expertise, we have experience, we have lots of points of view and lots of ways in which each of us is addressing this challenge in our own way. I wonder if we might just each take just a few minutes to talk about steps and solutions-oriented approaches that you might recommend, and maybe starting with you, Shaun.
You bet. So, this last conversation was really about how do you affect personal choices, affect political will, public will to make a difference. And I think there's a real good news story here. And to your question, how do you make the difference? And when I was on the city council here in Boulder, this was 2003 to 2009, in the midst of the Bush-Cheney years, Boulder was doing all kinds of crazy good stuff, like adopting the Kyoto Protocol and passing a climate action plan and passing one of the first carbon taxes in the world, talking about municipalization. And that was a difficult time, but there's a lesson in there that there was political will. And the political will was there because this community is one it's one that cares, and it's pretty sophisticated in its understanding of climate change. Now, I went from here to D.C. and ran into a whole big wall of what it's like when you don't have that political reality. But things are changing back there, and if you look at the public opinion polls these days, well over half the respondents will say climate change is happening. We got to do something about it. What we're doing at the President's directive is, as I mentioned earlier, trying to get established a climate, as part of the climate action plan, a clean power plan that will regulate carbon emissions from our power sector. It's a big darn deal, and I'd encourage all of you to really pay attention because it'll reduce carbon from our power sector 30% and really move us to a clean energy society. Investments in efficiency, investments in renewable energy, in cleaner technologies, and that is driving a conversation around the world, as Hunter opened up with. We're having conversations with China and India because of the actions we're taking right now. We've never really been in a position to even have the conversations with these other countries, so we got to get it across the line.
Yeah.
So I guess there's 3 solutions that I've really focused a lot of my time on, and 2 of them are really personal choices that I make and I try and really advertise to the racing community, and that is driving an electric car, as we've already talked about, and solar. And one of the reasons that these 2 solutions really excite me is that there's going to be a lot of options for electric cars out there. And the cool thing is that, like with my personal car, you're not sacrificing anything when you get a Tesla Model S. You're not sacrificing performance.
Yeah, just a little.
You still have a sexy car, you still have a fast car, you still have the speed. You have everything that a normal car connoisseur that is not a tree hugger and that is not going around trying to reduce their carbon footprint wants in a car. So I think in the past it may have been very difficult with the options that were there with electric cars to get somebody who was a collector of like Jaguars or Porsches or Audis or Mercedes to trade in their car for an electric car because there wasn't an option that could really compete. Well, now there is, and the good news is that people want them. So I'm excited, and I think the success of Tesla doing well means that now all the other car companies are going to start jumping in. And this is good because this is moving the needle in the right direction as far as transportation goes. The second solution is solar power. And I'm really excited about this because the cost of solar panels has dropped in price by 80% in the last 5 years. So this is a really positive story, and I think as we've talked about, it can be sort of depressing, the curse of knowledge that Jeff referenced. The more you know, the more that this can kind of seem overwhelming and a hard subject to tackle. So I think focusing on these success stories and these really positive stories within the environmental world is a great way to start. And the third solution that I really love and that I'm going to try and bring to the racing community later this year is plant-based diet. So we address this in our new film, Racing Extinction. More greenhouse gas emissions come from raising animals for food than the entire transportation sector combined. So this is a very big issue that a lot of people don't associate with climate change. They associate the car that I drive, well, I drive a Prius or a Leaf or a Tesla. But they're not thinking about what's on their dinner plate and how that affects our environment. So that's one of the issues that I haven't yet been able to really bring to the racing community in a big way, but I'm hoping to do that later. So those are the 3 solutions I like to focus on, and all of those solutions I think are really growing and having a lot of success. So I think it's good to focus on something that feels positive and feels like something that you feel like you can participate in a solution.
Well, Leilani said. No, we drove the Tesla off the lot, and Leilani looked at me and said, you know, every other car on the road just became a relic. It's really true. You know, it is an expensive car, but you know, I've adopted a plant-based diet too. It's you know, all protein comes from plants. So when you're eating an animal, you're just mugging it for its protein. You know, why not get a cleaner source and go right to the source? You know, well, the next film I'm actually doing is it's executive produced by James Cameron. It's super athletes that are plant-based. You know, world's strongest guy, vegan. World's fastest guy, vegan. 9-time world champion arm wrestler, vegan. These are smart guys. You know, that one of the guys, the strongest guy in the world, is actually a brain surgeon. You know, he just looked at what do you need for absolute maximum protein, and went right to the plants. So we're trying to get, you know, films to me are just a great way to, you know, we're talking to 100 people here, 150 people, but at film you can talk to millions. So that's what I do. So if you like the film, you see, like if you see Racing Extinction, the best thing to do is tell people about it. Everybody here has the power to change in the world. You know, it used to be back in, you know, my era when I was a journalist, you had to be, you know, work for the New York Times to get a voice. Everybody in this room has the power of a New York Times journalist now. So don't underestimate who you are and what you can bring to the conversation. When people ask what you can do, I always say, who are you? You know, what are you good at? And then use that to magnify these messages, because everybody here, you know, has the power to do something. We just happen to be on stage, but everybody out there can do something, you know, miraculous things. I hope it's going to be way more creative than what we've come up with.
Yeah. Just a modest qualifier on the plant-based diet, seeing Eisner in the front row. He told me that the legal weed in Colorado is now the 3rd dirtiest industry in the state. So the grow lights that are on 24/7 every day is an issue that it's not exactly always for edibles, but it's the downside of a different kind of plant-based diet that I think is deserving of someone's attention.
I'm not going to take that one.
Shaun's got a little. He's got.
I would add to that too. I mean, if you look at how they're developed with or grown with using pesticides. Right now, because of our legal framework, you can't take national federal laws because it's not federally legal, right? Ask your growers if you're buying marijuana if it's grown with pesticides, because a lot of them are, and it's kind of the Wild West out there.
Also, they use a lot of electricity.
Well, electricity
is
another.
So solution. Oh wait, maybe we should go to our Jeff. You got a little. A solutions-oriented segment you want to contribute here towards the end?
It's hard to top what's been expressed by everybody, but just to, I think just echoing Louie's last point, using your own voice. I mean, everybody has a voice, everybody has their own skill set, and like Louie said, this is one of the big messages that we have with Chasing Ice. Nobody told James Baylog to go out and install time-lapse cameras and photograph glaciers, but that idea that he had was able to create this snowball effect and have huge impact. So I've been blown away by the stories that we've collected of some kid who watches Chasing Ice and wants to start up a new company that's going to be pushing sustainable energy or new project ideas, or we've had countless stories that have come like that. It's really using your voice and using your skill set to figure out what you can do to make a difference.
And Eve?
Actually, that's kind of a perfect segue to what I wanted to talk about. I think that a hugely underrated way to use your voice, and this is going to sound corny, but I believe it, is to vote. And in the midterm elections, I think it was 12% of voters were under 30, and people under 30 in my age group theoretically overwhelmingly believe in climate change and care about climate change and care about green issues. And if they don't actually vote, then we end up with the kind of political situation that we're in right now. And at least as an American, that to me is by far the most depressing thing about the climate change conversation right now, is the fact that you're reading headlines every single day about prominent political figures just lying, basically. And yeah, if you don't vote, then you can't really complain about it.
Good point. Yeah.
I mean, can I just add one thing to that too? Not just voting, but just sharing your voice with your representatives. I mean, I can't poll the audience right now, but I'd be curious how many people in the audience there have actually written to their congressman or senator about climate change. We are in Boulder, so it's a little bit of a different scenario.
Everybody, Jeff.
Everybody's raising their hand. Okay, that works everywhere else. But really, one of the things that we found most surprising about the tour that we did in Ohio was that very few people do reach out to their representatives. We all feel like, you know, we're all jaded by the system. We think our voice doesn't matter. We think if we write a piece of mail and it'll go on their desk and it disappears. And the reality is our voice does matter, and our representatives are actually listening and tallying every single query that comes in about every single subject. And when a single subject kind of sticks out for some reason, whether, you know, there's a huge influx of a number of people that started writing about a certain issue, that's when politicians really start paying attention. And I think we need to organize those efforts to raise our voices collectively.
Yeah. Democracy is not a spectator sport. Yeah, you got to get engaged.
Well, ditto to what everybody said, but I'd like to look at it from a little bit more of a grassroots perspective. You know, for me, we had a young woman who was in the audience when we screened the film at the Boulder Theater, and she was 17, and she came up with her mother after the film, and, you know, she said to me, to us, that she didn't quite know what she wanted to do with her life. She was about to graduate, and she didn't know if she wanted to go to college yet. And one of the women that we profiled in Arise is Vandana Shiva, and she has a farm in India called Navdanya. And it's where people learn how to, the practical solutions for bringing the soil back to how it used to be, and getting rid of the pesticides. So I have to go back to that replenishing of the earth piece. And so what I would like to say as a solution is get involved. You know, get involved with organizations that are doing these things that will, you know, whether it's permaculture, whether it's planting trees. We have a whole section on our website for all the organizations and the women that we profiled. Support Winona LaDuke, who's standing up against the Keystone Pipeline, and the indigenous peoples that are going to be affected by that pipeline. So, you know, we have it. We're in Boulder. You know, we have the power to support those grassroots organizations. So that's what I would like to see happen as far as solution-based things that we can do.
I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach and speak that it'd be, I would like to see that the solutions to climate change be accessible to all people. So, not everybody can afford Teslas. Not everybody can afford these, things and solar power panels. We need education, and we need to be allies to people that are being displaced in environmental justice, places. It's not fair. We shouldn't go in there and tell them what to do, but I think if we're allies and be supportive of creating change, I think that's really powerful, and I think that that's something that does not get talked about enough, and it needs to be talked about.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. There's one thing we haven't been addressed that I'm going to bring up to it.
Hold on a sec. Hold on. George, any closing potential solution-oriented piece you want to talk about?
Yeah, look, it requires a transformation at all levels of society and economy. So I think you can go a little bit crazy if you look at the whole thing. And I think the thing that we're hearing from everybody who's speaking is, find your own niche and what you can offer. And I mean, for me, my niche and my obsession is well, I mean, let's put it this way. Like, I'm a liberal environmentalist, but I seem to be spending a lot of my time listening and talking with conservatives. We have spent a lot of the last 20, 25 years talking to each other. I think we have to get out there. And I guess for me, I absolutely agree with what we're hearing here about people finding their own voices, but I want other people to find their voices. I want people who haven't been heard yet from different social groups, from different ethnic groups, from different political groups and faith groups to be out there talking with each other and expressing not just the science of it, but their fear and their anger and their hope, like really galvanizing that. And if we can get that level of conversation going, if we can just break this silence, I think that's where the opportunity is to shift things politically. So yeah. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I'm going to agree in advance with whatever Hunter is about to say. much as I agree with everything that's been said so far. The science is there, the science is strong, the science is clear. I do think conversations need to be had. I do think stories need to be told in ways that speak to emotion, speak to people's hearts, speak to people's values. So to me, the crux, the critical element required to move forward, to realize all the things that we've heard, is to build the conversations around values, is to really meet people where they live, meet people where they think. When you talk to conservatives or liberals, understand why people think the way they do or feel the way they feel, and build the conversations around that. So have the conversations, but build them around values. Tell the stories in ways that reach people.
I agree. And I'm going to disagree with those who say we should only eat a plant-based diet. We should eat beef, grown the right way. Holistic grazing of beef is now the #1 item on the drawdown projects list. The grasslands are the world's 2nd largest carbon sink. They co-evolved with grazing animals. We know how to graze animals in a way that regenerates the soil, and we ought to be doing it. Don't eat feedlot beef, I agree, but don't eat plants grown industrially. The Planetary Boundaries folk have chronicled the 9 areas of planetary boundaries that we cannot exceed and continue to have a human species. We're beyond the boundaries in 4 of them, one of them being the nitrogen cycle. The nitrogen cycle is the denitrification of soil from unsustainable agriculture, much of it growing plants. Some of it growing cattle and other grazing animals the wrong way. I'm not going to defend anybody's doing something the wrong way, but we know how to do it the right way. Dr. Tim Flannery says biochar is the solution that will save humanity. Fine, do both holistic management and biochar. We need to take carbon out of the air and put it back into the soil.
Can I mention that 1/3 of the arable land on the planet is being used to grow plants that are being fed to animals for livestock? So,
if it's grass, that's a good thing. If the animals are being grazed holistically. Now, very few of them are. We need to start doing it that way. You can help by buying beef from local ranchers who are growing beef holistically. The Savory Institute right over here can tell you who they are. Lassiter Beef here in Colorado is one of them. There are a lot of others right here in the area that are growing holistically grazed beef. Do one thing. When you leave here today, do one thing. Dot. What's your dot? Do one thing. My one thing is I'm going to leave you in a second and run off to catch an airplane to go and meet with the senior executives of the Cheesecake Factory. Who'd have thought? They're seriously interested in sustainability. Mostly, I don't talk to people like us. Mostly, I talk to corporate executives. I'm a Teddy Roosevelt Republican. I believe in the deeply conservative values this country was built upon, so mostly I go and talk to people about those values. How do we build community? You know who in your community can grow a garden, can set a bone, can sew a quilt? How many of you know your neighbors? And how many of you talk to your neighbors about what matters to you? This community prides itself on being green. Bullshit! Bullshit! We're not. Communities like Vauban, Germany, have no cars. None. You can own a car and pay $40,000 to garage it at the edge of town, which is also where the car share program lives. San Francisco is going to be 100% renewably powered, perhaps as early as 2020. When are we going to be? Cities all across China are looking at becoming 100% renewably powered. Baoding, China, the young mayor woke up one morning to find that the lake that the city surrounded had died. The industrial toxins had killed all the fish. He said, polluting first and cleaning up later is very expensive. We're going green. So he's recruiting renewable energy companies to come and locate in Baoding. It's now called China's Electronic Valley. What's your money doing? Where do you have your retirement? Are you invested in fossil? Get it out! I did. I worked with a little company to help advise a little advisory here in Boulder called Principium. A guy named Michael Tracy, Donna Morton, who was one of our unreasonable fellows. We have what may be the only truly fossil fuel-free portfolio. And in the last year, you better believe it's been performing gangbusters. Now, that's not a prediction of the future. Investing in coal is probably a bad idea. You're going to lose money. Investing in oil, if what you really want to do is make a potload of money, that might be a good thing to do. And you're part of the problem. Let's move money from harm to healing. Let's invest it in entities. One of the things Principium's doing, when we're actually more than paying our own costs, we're putting the money into a fund to fund unreasonable ventures. You want to fund all these women around the world that are doing cool things in their villages? This is one way of doing it. So is your money going to pay some high-paid trader on Wall Street, or is it going into entrepreneurs that are part of the solution? Jigger Shaw, unreasonable mentor. Let's create a $10 trillion economy, 100,000 companies, each making 100 million worth of climate solutions. And those solutions are there for a $10 trillion economy. Sylvia Earle said, what we do in the next 10 years matters more than what humanity does in the next 10,000. 10 years, folks. So what is Boulder gonna do? Are we gonna municipalize? If you're not part of that, you're part of the problem. If you haven't written a letter supporting what the EPA is doing, you're part of the problem. It's time to get real. These problems are going to wipe out humanity if we don't act. If you don't believe me, go Google near-term human extinction. Now don't, because it'll put you in a very bad mood. When I did it, I was in a funk for 2 days. And then I asked Dr. Kevin Noonan, one of Rockstrom's guys on the Planetary Boundaries, is this stuff real? And he said, you know, on balance, I don't think humans are going to go extinct by 2050, which is what these guys are saying, with a fair amount of science behind them. Something like 20% of young Americans have this, affective anxiety disorder, manifested by cutting themselves. They don't believe there's a future. Teilhard de Chardin said, the future belongs to those who give hope to the next generation. So here's one thing I want you all to do. Go home tonight and Google Wangari Maathai. I will be a hummingbird. I will be a hummingbird. Little short video. We're here to talk about film. Go watch that. And I gotta go.
I didn't realize I was agreeing with so much. Should have gone last.
You know, everybody, we're out of time. Thanks to all the panelists, both with us and online. Thanks to all of you for coming. This obviously is an ongoing conversation. There is an opportunity to continue the conversation now. There are some small groups that have been divided up around the following categories: conscious money, oceans and animals, democracy and film, new energy roadmap, green communities, and creative climate education. So there's going to be some signs identifying where those kinds of focused conversations can take place. It's all dependent on how many of you want to stay and continue. I know there's other things going on today. I want to thank you all for coming, particularly thanks to our panelists, thanks to Joellen Raderstorff, thanks to the Boulder International Film Festival, thanks to the team here who's worked this event. You guys have, thanks Bruno. This is really a great way to continue the conversation. We learned a lot, I learned a lot. I think Leilani and Hunter are going to continue their conversation somewhere down the line, but Hunter was obviously scared by Leilani being a driver and everything, so she split. But anyway, thank you all. Thanks so much. Stick around for these focus groups, and as promised, there will be snack items. See you later.
That's really good.